Chapter 24, Part 4, 2 p.m. I'm meeting Brian outside Bow Street tube station at 3 p.m. His uncle lives on nearby Alfred Street and he's looking forward to meeting up and talking about old times. I love these kind of meets. I can lose myself in other people's memories, imagining I was there and being part of those times. Most old people make great storytellers. I'd better get a move on. My head is clear now. Notepad and dictaphone at the ready. Mr. Diary, you can stay here and relax. 6:30 p.m. Just back at the hotel. After a couple of days losing hope, I'm back on the trail. Meeting Sid, or Sydney Barton, was a breath of fresh air. I don't mean that in the literal sense, though. His flat stunk of stale cigarette smoke. He proudly boasted that he was a 50-a-day man and still as fit as a flea. He didn't look as fit as a flea, unless the flea in question was about to keel over whilst coughing its guts out every couple of minutes. It didn't put him off, though. Sid described himself as old school and not ready for the wooden box just yet. Brian clearly had a fondness for the old man and was affectionate and warm towards him. He went to make a cup of tea while we broke bread. Sid was clearly a cricketing enthusiast, and he knew all the clubs in the area. He knew which league they were all in and how they had performed in recent seasons. He was scathing of the current team at London Fields, but clarified that with, "It's probably because I'm a miserable, jealous old bastard who wishes he was still playing." I waited until Brian was back with the tea before bringing up the names of Curtis Long and Ernie Grimshaw. Sid took a sip of his coffee and smiled. "Which one first?" he said. I suggested he tell me what he knew about Curtis. He started. "Black as the ace of spades. Blacker. Well, you can't say that now, though. But he was. He came from the West Indies via America. Many of the new arrivals gravitated towards the cricket clubs from his generation, and the one before him. They call them the Windrush generation now, don't they? They've had a rough deal, poor buggers. It was the government's doing in the main, a cock-up from start to finish. It never surprises me how heartless and callous they can be. People are just numbers to them, figures on a spreadsheet. We welcomed them, especially down at London Fields. The West Indians and the Asians, they improved the team no end, and no one was better than Curtis Long. He was a dream to watch. What a player! He could bowl, bat, field, whatever was asked of him, and he could do it better than anyone else. Cricket fans all around the capital soon heard about him, and they would come down to watch us. He was not just the best in the East End. I would say there wasn't a better player in the capital, and I'm not joking when I say that. We could have hundreds of folk around the boundary watching Curtis play. He was a prized asset, even in his 50s. He could have been a top player. And what a nice fella, too. I asked him what it was like for a black player at that time. The 70s were an unforgiving era. Sid continued. "I won't lie, it can't have been easy for him, or any of them. The newspapers didn't help. They whipped up a storm or two to cause trouble. No different from these days. Some didn't settle, some struggled. Most Londoners were friendly, though. We weren't the insular racists they would have you believe. Treat as you find. Those that made the effort were welcomed with open arms. Certainly the folk in our area." "Curtis was living on the Isle of Dogs, wasn't he?" I asked. "How did he land at London Fields?" "He was spotted by someone and invited for a trial," Sid said. "There weren't that many established clubs, and the standard locally wasn't great. There was little money and the facilities were appalling compared to nowadays. We were okay, though, and we offered him a game. We made out we were doing him a favour, but it was the other way round, really. He was absolute class." I asked, "And Ernie? Did he play in the same team?" "Ernie," said Sid, a loud mixture of cough, spluttering and laughter. "Ernie was bloody useless. He couldn't swing a bat, he couldn't bowl, and he couldn't catch. He had about as much chance of getting in a team as my wife, and she's been dead for 15 years. I said, but he was involved with the team, wasn't he? Oh, God, yeah. He was involved all right. Yes, he did play on occasion, but only if we were desperate. He would put the boys in. We would put the boys in before Ernie. Why was he there then? I asked. Because we loved him, said Sid. He came along with Curtis at first. He knew he was a top player. Ernie promoted him. It only took one trial to see how good he was. The captain wouldn't let him go until he agreed to play for us. Ernie knew that he wasn't a good player himself. He never pretended to be. He just wanted to do right by his mate and give him a leg up and help him to shine. The two of them would come up and join the training sessions and games. But it was only Curtis that had a chance of playing in the first team, really. It was such a shame that he wasn't 20 years younger, or he would have played for the West Indies or England, I'm sure. Ernie helped out, sorted the kit, helped with the ground staff, prepared food and drinks. He didn't need to be there, but we encouraged it. We would pick him for a team just so he would come along sometimes. Why? I asked him. Because he was a joy to be around, that's why. A real tonic. He fitted in so well. After a few weeks, you would have thought he'd been there for years. Not cocky or smart, just really funny and warm. Away from the club, we didn't really know anything about the pair of them. They weren't from the area. Many weren't. But it didn't matter. We were a team, a club, and Ernie was part of the fabric, and we took him for granted. We loved him. Do you know what happened to Curtis? I asked. Yeah, said Sid. It was all of a sudden. Heart problems, wasn't it? A hell of a shock. We didn't recover for a long time after that. I know it sounds selfish, but that was the end of the team. People started to leave. They lost their enthusiasm for it. I stayed on to help the club, but it wasn't the same for a long time after that. The 70s and 80s were bad times. Bad for every club, but we really felt it. Times were hard and it was difficult to keep the club going after that. Did Ernie leave then too? I asked him. He did. He was around for a few weeks after Curtis died, if I remember rightly, but he wasn't himself. I think he started to suffer from depression, I told him. Did you notice anything? Yes, I think he did, said Sid. We didn't really know it at the time. You have to remember, he lived in a different part of the city. It seems nothing now, but it was a big deal then. Transport wasn't great. None of us had any money or mobile phones. We wondered where he was and we tried to stay in touch. Of course we did. But we sort of lost touch. It was a sad time. You only really appreciate what you have when it's gone. Both those lads proved that. I don't know what I could have done differently. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. I know I should have done more. I wish I'd done more. We all did. Did you hear from him after that? Only once, he said. A few months later. I'm guessing around 1980. He came back up to the club to ask my advice. He had moved to South London. It was great to see him. He was much more like his old self. He came up with Tim. I think it was Tim who coaxed him out of that bad time, the depression. He certainly helped. The two of them were inseparable. I think they needed each other in equal measure. He was much more like his old self. Tim was great for him, I think. I got on really well with him that day too. Such a friendly lad. The two of them were perfect together. I don't know where Ernie found him, but the two were well settled, and they lived in a flat in Surrey Quays. Why did he come to see you? I asked him. He might have been pretty useless as a player, but he'd become a pretty decent umpire. He came back up to ask some advice and to see if I could put him on the umpire list to be considered for games. He must have been kept busy though, as I didn't hear from him again after that. I know he used to go to Southwark a lot. He mentioned that. They had a decent enough club there, and I know he got involved with them. I guess he was in demand there too. If you find him, Paul, please give him my best wishes. He's a brilliant fella, a good friend too. I hope that, whatever he's doing, he's happy. He deserves to be. I promised I would. Southwark Cricket Club would be my next port of call. It wasn't too late to nip down there and make some inquiries. I asked a few more questions, and then I wished I hadn't. I asked him, "Do you know if Ernie stayed with Tim? Did they live together? Marry?" "I hope not," said Tim. "I hope not," said Sid. Tim was a bloody Labrador.